to share a little bit about the trip that I have, but Rabbi Reuben will also be sharing about the Israeli elections coming up as well, so it's kind of a joint presentation. I'm here today to share with you about a experience that I had, a trip that I had. The overall event between Rabbi Reuben and I is called Israel, Land of Opportunities and Challenge, because really that is the Israel that we're talking about. It's a place of great opportunities, and Israel, you get to experience so much opportunity, the people of Israel, but there's so many challenges that the people of Israel are facing. And the election is one example of just the challenges that are being faced. So I'm sharing with you what's called a frontline mission. It was a mission that the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry and several pastors like myself that were a part of that group went on a trip along with the Zionist Organization of America from May 23rd to 30th of this past year. And I'm going to share with you some trip highlights, a little bit of here's what we did on this day and this day, here's some of the places we went. And then I want to try to share with you why it matters to me as a Christian Zionist. And I call myself a Christian Zionist because I'm a Christian, but I also am a Zionist in the sense that I believe in the right of Israel and want to defend and advocate for Israel to exist and defend itself. And so it's important for me as a Christian to say why this trip mattered to me, even just from that standpoint as well. So the Zionist Organization of America sponsors a leadership trip every, I believe it's 2 years. The last time I think they went was 2020, prior to COVID, so came around again 2022. And it's made up of some paid staff from ZOA. They have representatives in Israel. They have representatives across the country. So several of their paid staff, including like an executive director, went on a trip, some area regional. But also important leaders, people that serve on the board, the national board, and other interested people that are part of the organization. So there were about 30 or 32 Jewish leaders that were on the trip, as well as a group from Friends of Israel. We had 5 Canadians who were on the trip, including Rob Goslett, who is the director of Friends of Israel Ministry in Canada with his wife. There were 3 other Canadian pastors, and there were 3 representatives from the United States. 2 from New Jersey, by the way, myself. We also have Tom Sincox, who's a part of Friends of Israel, based in New Jersey, and then we have Tim Munger, who is from Michigan. So we were a part of a larger group that toured Israel and saw places that the ordinary pilgrim wouldn't necessarily go to. Now, I just want to share with you a little about the trip, sort of like day one, here's where we went, a little bit of pictures, like I said, to give you some context, and I want to talk about why it's important. So, our first day, how many of you have ever gone to Israel? Okay, a couple of you. Did you get to sleep on the plane over? Okay, neither did I, okay? So, I had about 5 minutes of shut-eye, maybe, all told. So, you know, you're on a 10, 11-hour flight, you get off, you get through Ben Gurion and all of that, and the first thing I wanted to do was check into my hotel and take a nap, right? Because the official program didn't start till that evening. But of course, I had other pastors around me that wanted to see Israel, right? So no rest for the weary after a long flight with no sleep. A group of FOI, Friends of Israel pastors, we wasted no time. Hey, let's go get lunch at the Old City. Let's visit the Temple Institute. Let's visit the Western Wall while we're at it. And then let's walk through the entire Jerusalem Archaeological Park before we go back and take showers and then actually start the program. So it was exciting. And, you know, you just can't pass up an opportunity. You're in Israel. You're in Jerusalem. You want to go and see these things. So we went, of course, and went. Now, from the hotel to the Old City is actually only about 22 minutes by walking. But if you've been in Jerusalem, you know that it's mostly uphill. It's hills, so it was a good walk. It was a good experience, and then we walked all through. Now, I will say something about a couple of the places. The Temple Institute is an interesting place. Has anyone ever been to the Temple Institute? It's not one of those things that's on your normal, traditional place to visit. It's actually, when you go in there, through actual replicas and through videos, they show you what the temple would have looked like, in historic times, what the high priest would have been wearing, and what the altar, all to scale. So you would actually see all these things firsthand through video and even through replicas. And so the Temple Institute is studying and preparing so that one day, if a new temple is built, they're ready. They know exactly what it looks like. Again, that's they say that in their literature, but if you just want to go and see, well, when I read in the Bible, what did this look like? Well, now you actually get to see the dimensions. So it was quite an amazing place to go. The Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall, or the Kotel, is one of the most religious sites in the world for the Jewish people. It's that last remaining outer wall of the ancient Jewish temple. And so it is a place of deep reverence and prayer. And so we took time to be there in reverence and in prayer. Just an amazing place to be, to think about the events and the place at that particular time. The Jewish Archaeological Park is quite an interesting walk through history, going back to first century and to the artifacts that would come directly from that Second Temple era, the temple before it was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. And so, for instance, you find this one of the items, which is actually a replica. The real stone itself is kept very safe in a museum, but it's called this trumpet stone. And it would have been the stone that would have been at the edge of the temple, and it would have been where the priest would have been positioned to blow the shofar, right? To blow the trumpet, to call for prayer and before the beginning of Sabbath. And so this temple stone was found and excavated as they started excavating it, and they found it, and they found in Hebrew inscription, which indicates that it was exactly that stone that would have been right at the very edge and base of the temple. And so this replica reminds us that what they found point unmistakably to the facts of history, that there was a temple that stood there, that it was, everything that's written about in the Bible about the temple being there is in fact true. And so it was just neat to be able to see all these various walk through history all the way through and see all the stones and archaeological elements that show us the truth of the Scripture and what the Bible says about what happened in those days. So our day ended, but really began, because the official mission that evening, where the entire ZOA organization delegation came, we had a great meal. And one thing I learned about meals in Israel is that what you think is the meal is really just, the hors d'oeuvres, and so you start eating, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's actually another meal, and then there's another meal. It's quite amazing, but we did enjoy our time. We did hear from several leaders and politicians. They were able to bring some amazing people, including the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and several leaders from the Knesset were there the first night. So they greeted us and talked about the importance of Zionism, and so that was the first day. The second day in Israel, we headed to the Knesset and heard some lectures on Israeli politics. And that might say, well, what's that all about? Well, it's amazing just to hear the passion of these Israeli politicians. Some of them who really feel under fire in many ways, feel impassioned for what they're doing and what they're standing for. And just to hear the passion and the commitment that they've made to Zionism, to protecting the state of Israel from any enemies, internal, external, but to be there for the nation and to see the nation survive. And so it was informative and educational to be able to see these Israeli politicians up live, to be able to ask questions that several of our delegation asked, and to be able to hear them in their own words talk about their lives as Israeli politicians. One thing's unmistakably clear is that when you hear in the news that, there's no representation, the Arabs, there are Arab delegations within the Knesset. There are Arab parties, so there are Arab citizens of Israel that vote. And so make no mistake about it, although there are problems in Israel, it is a thriving democracy, the only thriving democracy, might I say, in the Middle East. And to see the Knesset in action is to remind us of the importance of Israel from the standpoint of just our own interest as the United States to have a thriving democracy in the Middle East. At the end of the day 2 of our mission, we visited a Jewish community. If you will, the burial place, the tomb of Simon the Just in East Jerusalem. Now, East Jerusalem is an interesting place. And it is a place of contention. This is the location where an ancient tomb of the Israeli high priest and his families. And we went actually into the tomb site itself and to some of the ancient tombs. You can see us standing in there, and you can see how they carved out of the rocks these tombs. And as people died in ancient Israel, they would be placed into a burial tomb, and their bodies would decay, and then the family would come back and collect the bones, and they would put them in an ossuary or a bone box. And so that was the burial customs. And just to be able to go in there and see that firsthand, and to think that this tomb site was used in 300 BCE, and there were families that were there, was amazing in and of itself. But this is a place of contention between Jews and Arabs. And we even saw some open hostility. This is not the kind of place that your traditional tour would go. So when we went from the Knesset to this place, we picked up our security guard, who was ready, had her gun. And as we were in the community, there were Arab neighbors that were watching and sort of heckling. And there were several more that came, and then there was a conversation. I stayed far away from that. It wasn't my business. But to see our Israeli security guard speak with them, and it just reminds us that there's so much contention in places like this in East Jerusalem, which is, not a part of the Jerusalem itself. It's a separate area, but a point of contention for many. So that's how we finished out day 2, being able to see those. After we did our official tour, we as Christian pastors were able to have dinner with Pastor Stephen Corey of Calvary Church in Jerusalem and Bethlehem. There are 2 church locations. And it's interesting, we don't realize sometimes that there are Christians, and they are free to be Christians in Israel. They're allowed to. Israel is a pluralistic community. It's a democracy. And so there are Arabs who are Christians who worship as we do. And this is an Arab Christian who is a pastor who has amazing courage. He's been beaten by Muslim extremists dozens of times. He's been attacked. The church has been firebombed in Bethlehem. And yet he has a caring ministry in his church and sharing his love for people, his love for the community, as well as God's love with all people. And he serves willingly Arabs, Jews, Christians, Gentiles, with the love and message of God's love in Jesus Christ. And just to hear someone who lives this kind of life in the circumstances which he finds himself, it was very inspiring for us. So this is something that we as a group of pastors did on the end of that second day. The third day we headed south, and I'll show you on a map where we were headed. We headed down to a place, have you ever heard of Gaza? This is this tract of land that is really obviously a point of tremendous pain for a lot of people. For those that live in Gaza, I believe it's a place of pain and suffering. But there are terrorists that are there, and it's really a terrorist base. So we went to southern Israel, and we went to the Urban Warfare Training Center on day 3. And what that training center is a place where the IDF trains, and at this place there were a lot of reservists. So we saw men that were in their 20s and 30s and 40s and even maybe plus that are reservists that train from time to time. And we heard about the challenges that they face being on the southern plank, on the border with Egypt, but also on the border with the Gaza Strip. And one of the things that they trained their reservists for is for tunnel warfare. So there were various replicas and training that you can see. You see the tunnel there on the left, and you can see they're training them to do tunnel warfare. Why do you think that is? Yes, absolutely, because the terrorists, with the money that they get from agencies, and rather than building hospitals and schools, and I don't want to sound totally negative, but I mean, rather than actually helping the people of Gaza, they often use the money to buy rockets and ballistics, but they also build tunnels. They build tunnels from Gaza. Again, if you look at the map, from that Gaza Strip, they build it into places into Israel so that their terrorists can go through the tunnels and attack Israel. And so they are training them to actually root out terrorists in the tunnels. And so it was inspiring to hear their passion and their commitment to the people of Israel, but saddening to hear that this is what they have to do in order to protect the people of Israel from attack. And so we heard about that and saw that. In the afternoon, around lunchtime, we headed to Sderot, which is a town that is very, very close. Again, if you look at the map, I think I have another map here. You can see that Sderot, you see the red pin that's there, shows how close it is to Gaza. And we visited the Sderot Hesda Yeshiva, which is one of the largest yeshivas down there in southern Israel. It's a place where young men study Torah as they're also preparing and working through military service. And we had a great lunch, heard from the director, but it was amazing to see the calmness of these people, just living their lives out, mere kilometers from Gaza. During the course of the day, as we took the tour, we were able to see, can you see up on the picture there what that is? It's a menorah. What's it made out of? Rockets. So there is a playground on this yeshiva, where rockets have rained down. They collected those rockets after one of those terrorist attacks, and they fashioned a menorah to show their commitment to their faith and to peace. And it's there on the rooftop of that yeshiva to remind them of the terrorist attack and how it's been transformed and changed for their own faith and their own courage. So, pretty amazing to see those kinds of examples of people that are willing to live on the front line, but also not ashamed to be who they are and to live their lives as observant Jews, despite living so close to the enemy lines. So that was very inspiring for me to see that firsthand. On day 4, we went to the tomb of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And this is not the place that a typical Christian pilgrim would go to for a couple of reasons. One was we had to, before we went on day 3, they said, make sure you take everything off the bus, because the bus we're taking tomorrow, the bulletproof bus, is different. So we actually took a bulletproof bus into Hebron. So this is the place that we were in Hebron. And we had to go through various IDF checkpoints in order to get to this location. This location is, again, the tomb of the matriarchs and patriarchs of Israel. And but just to see all the elaborate steps you had to go through just to get there, to see the place of the burial of Abraham and Sarah and the various patriarchs and matriarchs was to me a little instructive. Wow, I understand why Jennifer, who leads trips to Israel, says, we don't go there. It's not the place necessarily that's easy to get to. But we were able to not only dive into biblical history in hearing about the history of this place and how Herod actually built a structure over top the burial places, and it's one of the oldest structures in that area from 2,000 years ago. It has remained, and below that, though, are places where the tombs are, and you can kind of see a picture there with the green gates of one of the tombs that are venerated there, and you can see a larger picture of the actual structure that Herod built about 2,000 years ago over top all of those. And so, interesting historically to see, but also interesting from the standpoint of, wow, you know, it's not the kind of place that you'd think would be so guarded and so dangerous to be, and yet it is because of the dynamics that we have in Israel today. We ended day 4 by going up to a place near Ephrat, and we went to a place established by women in green. Az Vegaon, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. Agaon? Okay. Thank you. But it's a nature preserve to honor the lives of 3 Jewish teens who were murdered by Arab terrorists. And I want to share with you a little video so you have an understanding of the mission of this organization, why they exist, and the importance of remembering their lives, but also not just simply memorializing their lives, but saying, no, we're going to build upon their lives, and we're going to have a self-sustaining community. We're going to have a garden in a place where it once existed as a burial place for these murdered teens.
Gaon was established after the terrible tragedy in which terrorists took 3 of our children from us. But it is not a commemoration of the murders of Gilad, Eyal, and Naphtali. It is a celebration of life, a commitment to Eretz Yisrael, our ancestral homeland. Women in Green built a nature preserve in the forest overlooking the site of their abduction. Our response to terror is to build and to grow. Oz Vegaon is a beautiful site overflowing with Jewish life, attracting locals, tourists, and school groups from all over the country looking to roll up their sleeves and connect to the physical land.
אני מאוהבת בגבעת עוז וגאון. בלילה שבו הבאנו לקבורה נעורים שבאו פתע אל סופם, התחילו פה נעורים מחדש, התחדשות, הציונות, העשייה. אני פשוט לגמרי מאוהבת.
When you come to Oz Vegaon, you're filled with strength and energy. You touch it and feel the connection to Jewish history.
Thousands of volunteers and visitors have come here to learn about Eretz Yisrael and Gush Etzion. We are here to say Eretz Yisrael is ours, and Am Yisrael Chai.
Oz Vegaon represents the unbreakable connection of the Jewish people, regardless of where one lives, to the land of Israel.
From the very...
Okay, so that just gives you a little bit of an idea. Who is familiar with the murders that they were speaking about of these 3 young Jewish lives? And so it's not only a testament to them, but it's an unmistakable commitment to the future of Israel as well, and a commitment to say we will not let these murders and these lives go to waste. We're going to build upon it. We're going to stand. We're going to be strong. And so it was amazing to see that. We actually ended the day going to a place called Caliber 3, which is a training center for not only military, but also even for private security forces and civilians in counterterrorism and security. And they do a variety of different demonstrations there. We only had a little bit of time, but it was amazing to see the kinds of things that they do in helping prepare people, everyday people, to face the possibility of terror. Could you imagine if that was a normal part of our lives, where we had to think about the possibility of getting on a bus and encountering someone who was armed and ready to kill you simply because you are a Jew and you live in the land of Israel? And that's the kind of reality that the people of Israel face. And so practical places like this exist simply to prepare people for those kinds of realities. We ended the day at Mount Herzl with a speech by the president of the World Zionist Organization. And so, you know, these are the things, the kinds of things that we did on our trip, not that traditional pilgrimage where you go to just the holy sites. However, on day 5, we really got to a place that I was looking forward to deeply going. We toured the city of David, the 3,000-year-old home of the people of Israel and their king, King David. We not only toured places where, you know, you would see the archaeological sites of the home of King David. And in some sense, it looks like a pile of rocks, right? You look at the left side picture there and you say it looks like a pile of rocks, but you can just picture and imagine, as our tourist took us through, of the palace of the king and the various ways in which Jerusalem was bustling in those days 3,000 years ago as David established his kingdom in Jerusalem. And as they've unearthed this, they've seen more and more, and they've been able to confirm the historicity of the Bible and the accounts of King David. We were also privileged to be able to visit a place that to date not very many pilgrims have been able to go to. We got access to a part that is still under development, and you can see on the right side that there are air ducts. You know, it's still under development. But if you look at that stone pathway, that is a stone pathway that is verified at 2,000 years old. As they dug through underneath buildings that exist above it right now, as they're digging through, this is the road that pilgrims, including Jesus and his disciples, and many would have walked on their way to the temple. Just this past 2 weeks ago in the Jerusalem Post, I saw an article, quote, uncovering the ancient pilgrim to the Temple Mount. And it talks about this very road that is being uncovered and the significance of that road for biblical history. And I'll just read to you a little bit from that article. It said, but what did this pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem entail? While much of it is already described in the Bible and rabbinic literature, we now have a much better idea, thanks to the excavations in the city of David, revealing an ancient pilgrimage road. The Second Temple Era Road connects what is now the Temple Mount to the Shiloh Pool. The city, and then they make this statement. This is the Jerusalem Post, right? The city of David has provided a wealth of evidence to validate biblical claims. Now, the reason that we went to this place as the Zionist Organization of American Friends of Israel was to see a cool, neat place that validates, biblical history. But it also unmistakably shows that the central claim of Zionism is true, that this is the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people and their king, King David, and that it has existed long before, this land was theirs, is theirs historically, and for a variety of other reasons. It's their land, and it is their land that even God has given them. And so it's an amazing place to see when you unearth, to see exactly what's there. What was pretty amazing is walking along, we saw this little, almost looks like a petri dish. Can you see it here? It's and actually what it is they have enclosed this dust of the earth and this section of the of this walkway in glass to protect it. And they have a light, you can see, attached, a rudimentary light. I'm sure they'll have a much better display when it's opened up to the full public. But can you see what is in there? Right about to the left here from center, do you see what looks like a coin? There's sort of a little picture of sort of a leaf that you can barely see. I'll show you later, but it's almost like a greenish little color. There is actually a coin in there, in that they unearthed, as they were digging out, they found this coin. That coin is dated to just prior to AD 66 or CE 66. This is right before the destruction of the temple. They found this coin. So no doubt a pilgrim was walking along and lost a coin on the road. It was covered over the years, thousands of years. As they unearthed it, they found this very coin, which shows the date of that road and the people that traversed that road. So amazing to see that. On day 6 was Sabbath, and we, as the Christian pastors in the group, enjoyed a kind of a day of worship and pilgrimage ourselves. And so I just share, especially with our Christian group here, that we were able to do some of those traditional places that Christians would go in pilgrimage, including the Garden Tomb. It's a possible site of Jesus' burial and resurrection, and there we celebrated communion. And you can see the picture of course, the steps wouldn't have been there, but you would see a first century tomb site, and as you go in, you would see the place where a body would be laid, and there is a round, circular, elliptical thing that would have been rolled in front of the tombs of those days. And so you get a chance to see firsthand that kind of site. But this is obviously a very holy and special site for us as Christians to be able to be there and to think about the connection that we have to the events that took place there. This is one of 2 potential sites. The other site is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Below the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which exists today, there is a second place that could have been the burial tomb of Jesus. And so whether it's this one here or the one in the old city, more properly speaking, nevertheless, you get to see firsthand what a place of burial would look like. After we were able to visit that and have communion, we attended Sabbath service at the Jerusalem Assembly. It's a Gentile Jewish church in Jerusalem. It was very interesting to see the ethnic variety. People spoke many languages. Israel is a magnet for people, business people, a variety of researchers from all around the world that work and live in Israel, and they have a place to worship there outside of Jerusalem. Pastor Menno Kalisher is the pastor there that you can see on the left next to some of us. And so it was great. And the service was held in Hebrew and also in English. So it was a little bit longer service than maybe some of us Christians are used to because, you're translating. But it was still great to be able to see. But to see the variety of people that were there from all around the world was very inspiring to us. We then proceeded to the National Jewish Jerusalem Museum and saw the Shrine of the Book, where the replicas and where the displays of the the Isaiah scrolls of the Dead Seas are presented. Perhaps, if you're not familiar with that, years ago, some shepherd boys, discovered these incredible canisters containing the scrolls of Isaiah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so these scrolls confirm unmistakably that the writings that we have today, called the Book of Isaiah, are actually, very reliable, because these scrolls that were found in the 1948 and on show that what we have even today is what was written thousands of years ago. They were dated and ascribed. And so there's a whole museum for the scrolls of Isaiah. And also a full-scale, well, not full-scale, but a scale map and replica of the Second Temple era and of Jerusalem. So you can see here a scale of what the temple would have looked like and the environs around Jerusalem at that time, and you can walk around this amazing map, this amazing replica of the city of Jerusalem at that time of the Second Temple era. Amazing to see. As Christians, we continued our little special day where we ended the day touring the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is that place where Jesus prayed before his time of crucifixion, and to be able to walk through that special garden and to pray is very meaningful. And then to be able to stand in the Mount of Olives and look out at that city is breathtaking. How many of you have ever been able to see the city? I mean, does it take your breath away? It takes my breath away the second time I went. Every time. And so some of you might ask, there is the Dome of the Rock there, the gold arch, but, you have the old city, and you see, of course, the modern city behind it, but it's just an amazing sight to be able to see the city of Jerusalem and the old city from that vantage point on the Mount of Olives. We ended our day, this was the end of Sabbath, before we broke Sabbath and had a meal with the entire ZOA contingent again, our group of pastors were doing this on our own this particular day. We gathered back in the hotel, and Tim mentioned this in the morning. The entire delegation, the Jewish delegation of the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America, said, "Hey, we would love to hear from you, Christian pastors. Why are you on this trip? Why are you here? What's your passion for Israel?" So we were able to share with them about our Christian support of Israel with our now Jewish friends of the Zionist Organization of America. And I know I was personally pleased to be encouraged by them, and I hope that I was encouragement to them, but they certainly came up to us after and appreciated the time that we had spent sharing with them and talking to them about our commitment to the state of Israel and to the people of Israel. And I'll share in just a moment some of the things that I shared with them. The last day of our formal trip, we got close to, but couldn't get into, Bethlehem. We were able to get to a Bethlehem overlook. And so Bethlehem is south of Jerusalem, but we got as close as we could. You can see from the pictures that I took that there's quite a wall system and a security apparatus in place around Bethlehem. Bethlehem, years ago, used to be majority Christian, an Arab Christian, and now it's majority Arab Muslim. Many Christians have left the town of Jesus' birth. It is a difficult place to be these days. I mentioned to you Pastor Stephen Curry. His father still pastors a church, an Arab Christian church in Bethlehem, and the church is often under fire, and often terrible things happen in that city to Arabs, Christians as well, who it's a terrible place to be in Bethlehem, but that's as close as we can get. In 2 trips to Israel, back in 2016 and then in 2022, this is the closest I've ever gotten to the city of Jesus' birth. It's just not a safe place for pilgrims to be. We ended the day, on day 7, in meeting with a group called Regavim, I think, if I'm pronouncing it. Regavim, thank you. And we saw up close some settlements in Area C. Area C is a part of the West Bank that is, if I'm correct, under Israeli control, right, Rabbi Rubin? However, there are various places where there's land grabs, and these settlements, these small little settlements, as you can see, this is just a group of buildings that crop up. These are source of great conflict. The Bedouin and the Palestinian Authority set up a town, and it becomes a source of great conflict. To this little settlement, there have been UN representatives that have come, and a variety of different sources of conflict about these kinds of settlements. And so this group works to try and monitor these various settlements, where they're cropping up, and to try and protect as much as they feel they can Israel's Area C, and ensuring that these settlements are documented and that there's often legal challenges to these areas. So we learned firsthand how challenging it is from a legal standpoint and just from a security standpoint to try and monitor all these various areas within the West Bank. That day, our day ended when we were able to head back to the hotel, and this was also Jerusalem Day. Jerusalem Day is the national holiday that commemorates the reunification of East Jerusalem, including the Old City, after the Six-Day War of 1967, when Israel was able to reunify Jerusalem. Jerusalem Day is an amazing celebration, and we saw a variety of different people gathering, many young people holding Israeli flags, getting ready to march and parade. A day or two before that, though, as I had gone down to the hotel lobby and saw the English edition of the newspaper, maybe you can see the headline, "Jerusalem Day, Perfect Storm is Gathering." Well, the previous year there were conflicts, and there were some attacks, some bombing attacks during the celebration, and there was fear that that would happen again. And so we didn't go right to the middle of the Old City. We didn't want to necessarily be in the middle of something that might brew. Thankfully, nothing happened this past year. But it's amazing to see the joy and the enthusiasm of the people as they gather to celebrate their own independence and their own unification of the city of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem Day March, celebrating the reunification of the city in 1967, the Six-Day War.
Do you see all the young people? You see the families? It's just a family holiday, and yet to think that they had to consider, can I bring my children to this for fear that there might be a terrorist attack? Would you like to live in that kind of a world? You know, that's the kind of world that the modern-day Israeli lives in, thinking about celebrating a day and thinking about whether or not I can bring my family. So those are a little bit of the trip highlights, but I just want to very briefly, with the small time that remains to provide Rabbi Reuben adequate time as well, I want to just simply say why this trip mattered to me as a Christian Zionist. Not only was I able to see the history of the Jewish people, and again, piles of rocks that communicate the importance of the history and the right of Israel to the land, going all the way back to King David and even beyond. It gave me greater confidence in the historical roots of the Jewish claim to land, but also of my own faith as a Christian who reads the Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and reads and says, these things actually happened. I saw the place where all of this happened. And so it confirms the history and the claims of Zionism that we have a right to this land because we have occupied this land for millennia. But it also gave me an opportunity to develop clear thinking about the present challenges of a thriving democracy in the Middle East. Again, I mentioned going to the Knesset and seeing the Knesset in action reminds me to say thank you, thank God that there is a thriving democracy in the Middle East, and that there are people that have rights. And although we can sometimes criticize Israel, and there's talk about how they handle the Arab-Israeli conflict, the reality is that there is an opportunity for Arabs to have representation in the Knesset as well. And there's a thriving democracy in the Middle East. So when you hear people say, make accusations against Israel, just remind them it's a democracy. Yes, every democracy has its problems, but they are striving to be a democracy in a place of the world where there are few, if any, other democracies. It also helped me keep and develop a sincere friendship and love for my neighbor. part of the reason that I went to Israel was to be able to hear directly from the people that live there, but also from the Jewish leaders that we traveled with, to have meals with them, to hear about their concerns, to learn from them, to be able to come back and have some information, to be able to talk to my friend Rabbi Reuben and talk about the concerns and his perspective on Israel today. You see, it matters to me because it matters to him. It matters to me because it matters to you. It matters. And as a Christian, I should simply be, first and foremost, concerned about the needs of my neighbors and their desire and their concern to have a land that the Jewish people can call their own, and to be able to then therefore advocate for those things is so important. It matters because when I go to a place like Sderot and I see a menorah fashioned out of weapons of warfare, it reminds me that the battle that the people of Israel are facing is real, and lives are at stake. And it's not just a sterile political debate, but it's actually about lives that matter. And we can't go back to the past, and we dare not forget what happened in the past. And we must fashion a future where all people have freedom, but that includes the people of Israel and the land that they live in. And so in the end, I wanted to be able to address anti-Semitism even in our own day. And as a Christian Zionist, again, what's a Zionist? A Zionist is simply someone who believes that Israel has a right to exist and defend her land. And as a Christian, I have a stake in that. And I would suggest that as Christians, we all have a stake in being supportive of the land of Israel. If not just for the history and the connection to the land and our people and our faith, but just simply because our neighbors and our friends and those in Israel need our support. And so it was a way for me to be able to learn and to continue to be an advocate for the fair treatment of the Jewish people and the biblical, historical, and legal rights of the Jewish people for the land. And so it was a privilege for me to be able to go. I thank the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry and Tim Munger for providing me this great opportunity to go and to see places in Israel that not too many people get to see, to be able to stand in those places and to be able to stand with people that are there in the land and simply want to have peaceful lives. We should stand with them. And so, Rabbi Reuben, thank you for coming as well. You're going to talk about the challenges that Israel faces right now and very soon. So I'm going to give this to you to take over at this point. It'd probably be better if you're up here, if you don't mind, just to get a full recording for it, okay? I will. I'll hand them out. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for the experiences that you had. We'd like to move forward to right now in the life of Israel. And the elections are coming up on November 1st. And you might say it could be a bit of a dry subject, but in Israel, elections and politics are not a dry subject. And in fact, in order to understand the heartbeat of what goes on a daily basis, it's important to understand how the election system works. So as a handout going around, I hope you're comfortable with a little bit of math. We'll try to guide you through that if you're not, but it's important to understand how the system works. So first of all, as Pastor Alex said, Israel is a thriving democracy, a very robust democracy. There are many aspects to that. That, of course, involves elections, involves freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, things that we take for granted, but we should not take for granted here in America. And that's part of a democracy, a judiciary, legislative body, executive body, things that we're familiar with. So what I like to do is I tried to break this up into several steps. Some of you have heard this presentation before because Israel is now facing its 5th election in 4 years. So it comes up a lot. Okay, I hope everyone has one. Yeah? Okay. So, and we have a few extra if anybody walks in. Okay, so you can take these home and read it over again. I recommend reading it slowly and kind of absorbing each point because each point builds on the next. So number one, there are 120 seats in the Knesset. The Knesset is the Israeli parliament. There's only one house of parliament, not like America, we have two, Senate and House. The Knesset is 120 seats. There's no districts. Everything is a national election. The whole state of Israel is one district. Right? So when they vote, they don't vote for local representatives like we do here. But, and again, it is a democracy. It functions different than American democracy, but it's still very much a democracy. So how does the election work? Number two, before the Knesset election takes place, each party, and the deadline was last month, each party submits a list of individuals in numbered sequence and runs that list in the election. Higher up the list, safer you get in. So if you take a look at page 3, open it up and look at page 3. I can't vouch for the accuracy. I got this online, but presuming it's accurate, whoever the website that posted it, these are the parties. Well, actually, 40 parties that are running in the Knesset election. These are the 13 that are likely to get in. As we'll see why some parties don't get in. But so there's 40 different parties running, and each party, in order to run, submits. I mean, people have to serve in the Knesset, right? So each party submits a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, as many as they want to submit, and that's. As we'll see in a moment, how you get into the parliament, the Knesset itself. The only one, column 3, it says religious Zionism. I think that was a mistake. Number 2 should be number 1, and number 1 should be number 2. That was what the website had, but we'll come back to why that's significant in a moment. But so these are the parties that are likely to get in, and we'll see how they get in a moment. So if you go back to page 1. Okay, so what does the Israeli voter vote for? Number 3, each individual voter gets one vote to select one party, along with its list, from the various parties that are running. There are usually 25 to 35 parties. As I mentioned, this year there's 40. 40 different parties have submitted names to run. And each one, now they can submit a lot of names, a few names, whatever they want. It depends how optimistic they are. But when you go to the voting booth, you get one vote, and you pick your party. That's it. So in some ways it's simple, but in other ways it's complex, because what if you like number 6 on the list, but you don't like number 5 on the list? What are you going to do? You can't just split it. There's no split votes. And maybe you like number 1, but you don't like number 2. You know, so you have to pick a party that best represents you in all its totality. And that's hard to do, because there are many. We'll come a little bit into the differences between the different parties. So you get one vote, and you look at number 4. So how do the people get elected? Each party receives a percentage of the Knesset seats based on the percentage of the votes received. And that's what on page 2 gives you a sample. Okay. So this is just a hypothetical example. Let's say with 4 million votes cast, there happens to be, as we'll see in a moment, a threshold in order to get into the Knesset. We'll come back to that. So let's say 10 parties run the election, which of course is more than that. Okay, so here's results of parties A through J, and each one, you know, obviously it's just a hypothetical example, round numbers. So there is a threshold to get into the Knesset of 3.25, 3.25%, right? So that of the 120 seats, the smallest party would be 4 seats, because you get the number of seats based on the percentage of the vote, of the national vote. So Party A, for example, if you look at the bottom of page 2, Party A with 940,000 votes ended up with 24.48% of the Knesset, which out of 120, that turns out to be 29 seats. So Party A would get the first 29 on their list would become members of Knesset. Number 30 on the list gets to go home. That's the way it goes, you know. If they had gotten a few more votes, maybe 30 would have gotten in, and 31 would be the one to go home. Now, it turns out that if somebody resigns, let's say number 7 resigns, everybody moves up. So number 30, who went home, gets called back and say, oh, you're now a member of Knesset. Right? So it's a little different. And then, Party B, 770,000 votes, got a little over 20% of the Knesset, which is 24 seats. Party G, for example, got a little over the threshold and got 5 seats. So again, it's a hypothetical example. It gives you an idea. We go back to number 4 on page 1. So you get a percentage of the Knesset based on your percentage of the national vote. Fractions, of course, are worked out because you can't have half a person in the Knesset. You know. So there are a lot of very complicated rules on how to resolve the fractions, but eventually 120 seats have to be allocated, and it happens. Now, there's this qualifying threshold of 3.25% of the national vote. So if you fall short of that, you get 0. Now, it used to be, I think the previous threshold was 2%, and I think at one time it was even 1%. So you could have had a party of 1, you know. They kept raising the threshold thinking that it would get rid of small parties, but some have argued that it kind of boomerang. And so 40 different parties are running, but most of them won't get in. Now, do they know they're not going to get in? You have to ask them. They hope to get in, and we'll see why it's so significant in a moment. But they generally don't get in. So if you think if 13 parties get in, that's 27 parties who submitted lists, who went through the process, and just don't get in at all. Because they need 3.25% of the Knesset, which would be approximately, let's say 150,000 votes, approximately. You know, so if you only get 1,000 votes, you don't get in. You know, and we'll see if you go to page 4 for a moment. These are the we'll come back to the parties themselves, but if you look at the 27 other parties who generally failed to get the right percentage, all kinds of different parties, all kinds of agendas, all kinds of points. The most famous tends to be the Pirates Party, you know. So, you know, there are all kinds of different parties with different agendas, and but we'll see why they try in just a moment. Okay, back to page 1. Number 5. Okay, an individual listed on the party's list gets elected to serve based on how many seats the party wins. We already mentioned that. If the party wins 20 seats, the first 20 get in, not the 21st. If there are only 10 seats, the first 10 on the list. After an interesting question, which I have to find out, what if a party does better than they thought? I have to find, you know, they submit 10 names and get 12 seats. I don't know the answer to that. I was thinking about it when I prepared this. I said, I guess it doesn't happen, but you could submit 120 names, but that's pretty optimistic. You're not going to get 100% of the vote. You know? So, they might call you and ask you what you're doing. Yeah, right. All right. Kind of backup, standby, on deck. You know, pinch hitter. I mean. Okay, so eventually 120 seats get elected. Now, and I mentioned if somebody resigns or passes away or whatever, the next person on that party's list moves up. And that happens. That happens. Okay, so number 6. This is where it gets tricky. A ruling majority needs to be formed of at least 61 Knesset members, right? That's the majority of 120. Since the first election in 1949, no one has ever won 61 seats on their own. Theoretically, they could, and then they'd be the majority party, and that's it. So without a one-party majority, a coalition of parties needs to be formed that adds up to a majority of at least 61. And that's been the trouble for the last 4 elections, because the politics in Israel is very split. So there's a number of blocks of parties, a coalition that hovers around 60. Well, 61 is a majority, 59 is not. All right, and the coalition had 61 or 62 at the beginning, and it whittled down as one person left, another person left, and got to 59, and they eventually dissolved the Knesset because it's hard to function without a majority. So that is the next step. So how do you form a coalition? Okay, look at number 7. You can't just say, oh, we'll walk in, you know. So there's a process. Number 7, following the calculation distribution of the Knesset seats, by the way, I'll say it at the end, but I'll say it now. The one lesson you can take from all this is the difference between our elections and the Israeli elections is November 1st is the Israeli election. It is not the end of November 1st is not the end of the process. It's only the beginning of the process, right? It'll take several weeks to form the government, as we'll see in a moment. Now, here we thought at the end of Election Day or a day or two later, usually we get the results. But that's not the same. So number 7, following the calculation and distribution of the seats, when every party finally, it takes a while to calculate and figure out the fractions, and when all 120 seats are allocated, now the president of Israel, who's not the prime minister, president is currently Chaim Herzog. Chaim Herzog was his father. I'm sorry. It was President Herzog, though. His father was also president. The president of Israel, mostly an honorary figurehead, but with this one important political responsibility, meets with the delegations of each party that were successfully elected in the Knesset, because a lot of them don't get in, and charges the leader of one of the parties with the assignment of forming a majority coalition. And basically, each party comes in and says, you know, Mr. President, we recommend person A. Somebody else says we recommend person B to the prime minister. The president listens to all the parties who get in, and then just chooses one of the party leaders to form the coalition. He gives them 4 weeks to do it. All right? So that's for sure. Election day is not over. It's only the beginning. Now, who does the president choose? That's a tough challenge, okay? The president can choose any party leader. It used to be thought that the one with the largest delegation would have the best shot at forming a coalition. So if you had 40 seats out of the 120 and you need to get to 61, why not ask that party leader to start the process, give him 4 weeks to do it. Up until a few years ago, the party leader was always able to do it. But what's happened in the last several elections is that they were not able to do it. So what happens in that case, the president does not have to choose the leader of the biggest party. He chooses the leader who has the best shot and the best chance, based on political insight, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, of forming the coalition. So he's got 4 weeks to do it. So the election happens, figure about a week to 10 days till the numbers get sorted out, and then there's a week or so of meetings with the president, because there's a lot of parties have to come and meet. And then there's 4 weeks to see if they can form a government. So it's probably minimally 6 weeks after election day that we'll know who the government of Israel is going to be. Now, the interim government continues. It's not like there is an interim government right now, and they'll continue, functioning as best they can. Number 8. Discussions and negotiations take place between various parties. If the party leader chosen by the president is successful in forming a majority coalition, and we'll see how that happens in a moment, then the proposed governing coalition is presented for acceptance. So if they get several parties together, let's say a 30 and a 25, that's 55, and maybe a 10, that's 65, and the three of them get together and say, okay, we come back to the president and we present our coalition. 3 parties, 65 seats, okay? If the party leader is not successful, the president can grant an extension of another 2 weeks, which has happened now. It didn't happen until a few years ago, but I'm sorry, an extension was common, but what happened was they were actually unsuccessful even after that. Or it can choose another party leader to form a coalition, give them 4 weeks. Right? Now, you think 4 weeks is a lot of, it seems like a lot of time, but there's a lot of discussions that go on, and we'll talk about what kinds of discussions are. But on the other hand, there's a lot of anticipation. These parties are already thinking about, they're not strangers to each other. They have an idea who they might hook up with as a coalition, combine as a coalition. And so the second person has the opportunity to try to form a majority coalition and can present it for acceptance. If attempts to form a majority coalition are not successful, guess what? They start all over again, right? And have a new election and just start the process again. Who will lead the next government? The process will only begin on November 1st, not end. So don't be surprised. Now, a little bit of dynamics. Again, it's hard to cover everything. There's a Jewish expression, teach me everything while I'm standing on one foot. Not so easy to do. But if you look at the page of number 3, page 3, just to give you a little bit of dynamic, as I said, there are many. These are the parties who are currently in and more likely to be in. These are the number of seats they have currently, with a few variations, because the parties in Israel are also not necessarily like the parties we have here. You can switch party membership. You can join another party. You can dissolve your party and form another party. You can form the party is the list, and very few of them even have primaries like we have. Although some do, some of the bigger ones. But ultimately, the party leader chooses their list of candidates. And remember, the Israeli voter gets that one vote, has to take all this into account. when they get that one vote of who they're going to vote for. So, and they see the list. They know who's on the list, but they still have to decide. So these are the number of seats they have currently. The ones that have an asterisk are the ones who are in the coalition right now. It started out around, I think, around 62. It whittled down to below 60, and so we have another election. If you look at the bottom of column 2, the National Unity Party, I put 14, which is really an 8 plus 6 because it used to be 2 parties in the last coalition. But this coming election, 2 parties got together and said, let's run as one list. And so they integrate the people into their lists. Okay, my party will get 1 slot, you'll get the 2nd slot, I'll get the 3rd slot, you get the 4th slot, and try to kind of integrate. So they think they're going to do better running together rather than running separate. And why is that important? Well, if you look at some of the parties, they only had 4 seats or 6 seats. Some of them, the United Arab List got 4 seats. There was an Arab party called the Joint List, which had Hadash, Ta'al in the last column, and Balad all together. They had 6 seats together. Those are 3 different parties that had 6 seats total. If each one ran separately, maybe they get 2 each and they wouldn't even get in. Right? So they're saying, well, maybe we ought to combine. And when there were 4 Arab parties a few elections ago, and they actually got about 15 seats together because it spurred turnout. So it can vary a lot. And if you take a look at the last page, okay, you can read the top part on your own. This is from the Israel Democracy Institute, giving you a little bit of a summary and also a little bit of a current situation. But look at the bottom of page 4. All right, so this is kind of comes down to the crux of it. And these are oversimplifications, but these are terms that Israel uses, the Israelis themselves use, right? Because there's a lot of parties, and how do you sort out these parties? And again, the parties represent lists of people, but they generally represent a community. So if you take a look at the bottom of 4, there's 2 parties that are called the Orthodox parties because they're made up mostly of ultra-Orthodox Jews. Now, it's not 100%. An Arab could vote for them if he wants to. A Bedouin could vote for them. A Jew can vote for the Arab parties. It's all private. You go in, you pick a slip actually, and you put the slip in the box or in an envelope, and it goes in the box. So it's all very private. So you can vote for who you want, but generally these parties represent communities. And so you have 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, the Shas and United Torah Judaism. Now, just to give you an inkling, why are there 2 Orthodox parties? Well, there's different, like in Lakewood, by the way, the Orthodox community is not monolithic, right? There's a lot of differences within the ultra-Orthodox community. The Shas represents the generally Sephardic community, Jews from Spain, North Africa, the Arab countries. United Torah Judaism generally represents the Ashkenazic ultra-Orthodox, France, Germany, Poland, Russia, And within that, there's, by the way, most of these parties, some have sub-factions within, and that's an internal thing. But United Torah Judaism, why is it called United Torah Judaism? Because there's a Hasidic faction and the non-Hasidic faction. And again, from someone from the outside, you look at Lakewood, you think everybody's the same, but they're not. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. You can invite me back, and we can have another talk about that. But the ultra-Orthodox community is very diverse, and there's what's called the Hasidic branch and the or almost anti-Hasidic branch. They form together United Torah Judaism. So those are the Orthodox parties. Then you have on the far right of this, although not politically, you have the Arab parties. As I said, United Arab List, which is actually one party now. Hadash Ta'al, which is 2 parties running together, and Balad, which is a one party. The Hadash Ta'al and Balad ran together in the last election. Now they split up. So, these things, these combinations recombine every time. New parties can be formed all the time, or old parties can fall away and dissolve. Now, other than the Arab parties and the ultra-Orthodox parties, you have the more political spectrum, which you might be more comfortable with, or familiar with, right, center, left, and left. Sometimes there's a center party altogether. You're not locked, these parties are not locked into this category, but it's pretty much how people think of them. It usually has something to do with their attitude toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whether they want basically all the Arabs to leave altogether, or whether they want, one state, a binational state. There's a whole spectrum in between. 2 states for 2 peoples, all kinds of discussion we could have another time. But there's also right, left, and center on economics. The old labor parties came from basically a socialist, where the kibbutz movement, people do things communally, and the government owns a lot of it, or more capitalist, or more private enterprise, and so that there's some spectrum of that too. So on the right, generally considered the right, you have Likud, a party called Religious Zionism, Israel Beitenu, and Habayit HaYehudi, different parties. You can see on page 3 what they are. Then there's center-right, which is this National Unity Party. Then there's center-left, Yesh Atid. Lapid is the head of that party, and he's the current interim prime minister. And then you have the left of Labor and Meretz, and then, as I said, the Arab and the Orthodox parties. Now, that's generally how people used to vote. They say, well, I get one party, and I kind of feel comfortable with this side of the political spectrum or that side of the political spectrum. In the last several elections, that has not been the issue. Right? That's generally thought of as the issue, right, center, left. The general issue of the last several elections is, do you like Benjamin Netanyahu, or do you not want Benjamin Netanyahu? That's been because he's now the prime minister for the most number of years, even surpassing David Ben-Gurion, founding prime minister. And some people like Netanyahu, and some people don't want Netanyahu. So the basic debate of the last several elections has been the pro-Netanyahu bloc, or the change bloc, as they were called, the non-Netanyahu bloc. And the question is, and that's a whole dynamic by itself. I don't know Netanyahu personally, so I can't, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people love him as prime minister, and a lot of people would want anyone but him as prime minister. It's a democracy, right? So they choose their leaders just in a very different way than we do. So I put down generally pro-Netanyahu parties and generally anti-Netanyahu parties, and there's a couple parties generally don't endorse either side. They get in Knesset, but they don't endorse any particular candidate for prime minister. Now, right now, they say it's almost 60-60. Right? But if you watch the news, and you watch the news for Israel, the polls are, and of course you can't, there's only one poll that counts, that's November 1st, but the polls are running approximately 58, 59, 60, 61 for Netanyahu's bloc. And of course, any one of these parties in the bloc could change their mind and say, we went with you last time, but we're not going with you this time. And so don't count on us, Or a new party could come in and say, we'd like to go with you. And then there's what's called the change bloc, who wanted anybody but Netanyahu. Right? Now, it turns out some of the leaders of those parties were people who used to work with him. So it's all kinds of a lot of personal issues there. They like to work with him at one time, now they don't. Okay. So, getting back to that threshold, okay, and this is the kind of things you can watch for as you watch the elections unfold after November 1st. One will be what party gets, how many seats each party gets. And you can use this as a scorecard, like you said, and compare it to what they have now. So Likud has 30 seats right now. If they get 35, oh, it's very nice. That's a bonus. Plus, if they get 28, they lost some support. Right? Okay. Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid, this is on page 3 now. He's the current interim prime minister. They have 17 seats. If he goes up to 20, 22, that's a trend. If it goes down to 14, that's a message, right? The National Unity Party, Benny Gantz is the defense minister now. Now it turns out that Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid used to be together in one party. That was a few elections ago. They split up. Okay. That doesn't mean they can't re-coalition together, but they're running separately. Benny Gantz and Gideon Sa'ar, 1 and 2 under National Unity, they're the two leaders of the two parties that joined together. Religious Zionism has 6 seats. That is the big one to watch. It's extremely far right, and that's why it's important that number 1 and number 2. I don't know why they had it this way, but Bezalel Smotrich is actually number 1 on the list. Itamar Ben-Gvir is number 2. Itamar Ben-Gvir is considered extremely, extremely right-wing and very controversial. Even the U.S. Congress, some congressional people have expressed concern if he gets into Knesset. He'll probably get in, but the question is, we'll see about coalition dynamics in just a moment. And so you can follow these. Now, if any of these parties don't get in, the parties who do get in get more seats. You still have to divide up 120. Right? So if anybody falls below the threshold, and that's an issue for labor and merits. For example, labor is hovering around the threshold, and labor was one of the founding parties. David Ben-Gurion they used to get 40 seats, but that was decades ago, and it's old history now. So the small parties may just make that difference. If they don't get in at all, those votes are, quote, wasted because they don't count for anything. So the big parties are saying, don't vote for the small parties because you might, if they only get 3 seats, they don't get any, and your votes, in a sense, don't matter. Vote for us, we'll get in. But now, what happens? If there's not enough small parties, it's hard to form a coalition because there's only so many parties you can go to. You're not going to go to your enemy, basically, your political enemy. So the big parties need the small parties. At the same time, are concerned about them. So because if the small parties get in, they might just be the 4 parties that you need to go from 57 to 61. And that's what happened in the last few elections. In fact, what happened to Netanyahu in the last election, why he didn't get in order to get his 61, he needed the far right party and one of the Arab parties, and each one said, we're not sitting with each other in the coalition because it's just too extreme. So what happened is a different coalition was formed of 8 parties, which is a lot. It was diverse, it was right, center, left, Arab included, and they worked it out for about a year. It lasted for about a year. So there is potential for people to come across. It was the first time, the current government was the first time an Arab party even served in the governing coalition. Now the others are in Knesset, they're in the opposition, so they can vote any way they want on things, and sometimes there's party rules, party discipline, sometimes not. Now, what about these 27 parties who are not likely to get in? They might run because they just feel so strongly about their one issue or their 2 issues. They want to make a statement. But they also hope to be that 4-seat party. If they can just cross the threshold. So, 150,000 votes is a lot, but it's only 4% of the 3.25% of the whole. If any small party, even though they're only focused on 1 or 2 issues, can get that 4-seat threshold, and if they just turn out to be the difference between a 57 coalition and a 61 coalition, that gives them the power to decide who the next government of Israel is. So they don't expect to get 30 seats or even 10, but if they can just pass that threshold, they can end up being what we call the kingmaker, gets to decide. Because each coalition might have 57 of their own, and each one's going to woo that party and say, all right, we don't know much about you, but you got 2 points in your agenda. They're reasonable. We'll work on getting that done. Join our coalition. And they might do that. Now, the danger is 6 months down the road, even if they do, the small little party could say, you know what? We're not happy with what you've done or not done so far. You haven't done enough. We're going to leave the coalition. Your 61 now goes to 57. Most likely the government will fall. And so they have a lot of leeway there. But on the other hand, if they leave the coalition, then they're out. And who knows how they would do in the next election. So it is a complex system. I appreciate you listening. Take this home and read it over again. It may take a few times to kind of sink in. Use it as a scorecard. Again, November 1st is just the beginning. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming.